Well, welcome everyone. My name's Tim Colson,
Hi everyone, I'm Syma Khalid.
and we have another episode of Science of the Times podcast for you. And what have we got today, Simon?
Yeah, so today I'm pretty excited because we've got someone who's on to talk about dinosaurs.
I know
Yeah.
everyone loves dinosaurs. It's amazing how they've kind of captured the public attention.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because it's cross cultures and everywhere. Everywhere you go, sort of kids are fascinated with dinosaurs, adults are fascinated with dinosaurs. So I think it's almost a dream job as a scientist, isn't it, to work on dinosaurs?
It is, and Roger. I mean, I'm sure he won't admit it, but he's kind of definitely one of the world's leading dinosaurologists, if that's even a word. So no, it's we're lucky to get him. Shall we get him on without any further ado, and then we can sort of discuss a few things afterwards?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Okay, well, welcome, Roger. Would you like to introduce yourself? Say a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. And I'm Roger Benson. I'm the Macaulay Curator of Dinosaur Paleobiology. So, the Curator of Dinosaurs at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. But I'm English, you can probably tell. So,
So that's probably like the plushest dinosaur job in the world, is it?
well, it's not the job, it's the person. And I wouldn't claim to be the greatest dinosaur paleontologist in the world, but it's a pretty great place to work. And, the museum has one of the best collections of fossil dinosaurs in the whole world, maybe the best. And it's just like a super exciting place to be for paleontologists.
It
And
seems to me like that it's in general, working with dinosaurs must be one of the most sought after jobs. I mean, when you talk to young children, one of the things, it always comes up, right? Everyone wants to do something with dinosaurs or are fascinated by dinosaurs.
Yeah, it's very popular among kids. I was interested by dinosaurs as a kid, but I wanted to be a physicist at that time. And my kid, he's the only kid in the world who has no interest whatsoever in dinosaurs.
so you're literally like the opposite of every physicist who started out wanting to be a paleontologist studying dinosaurs and then ended up. So you did it the other way around.
But you can imagine that, like other physicists, I thought, dinosaurs are interesting, but I've gone the whole way. Now I actually study them. So,
And so when did you get interested in dinosaurs if it wasn't as a kid?
well, I was interested in them as a kid, but I didn't think that was a serious career option. In fact, I remember when I was 6 years old, the teacher went around the class asking people what they wanted to do when they grew up. And I was considering saying paleontologist, but she got to Henry Tootle first, and he said paleontologist. I had to change my mind very quickly. Um,
What's he doing
then,
now?
I was always interested in science. I wanted to study physics. I went to university to study physics. And then I discovered that you could actually study dinosaurs and other fossil animals as an object of scientific inquiry that might tell us important things about life on Earth. So then I thought I should do that.
I have to ask you though, what happened to, what do you say, is it Henry Tootle? What?
Henry Tootle. Well, I don't know what happened to Henry Tootle. Um,
Anyway, let's.
Not a paleontologist, as far as I know. I think I would know if he was a paleontologist.
Okay. Well, why don't we dive in and ask you some questions about dinosaurs because that's what our listeners are going to want. And actually, talking about people loving dinosaurs, I've got a couple of nephews, Ben and Harry Fitzjohn. So a big shout out to them because they're definitely going to be listening to this about dinosaurs. Simon, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, sure. So, Roger, yeah, given we've said that dinosaurs and the topic's so popular with children, and I think it's popular also with adults, is there something, that very sort of obvious to you about dinosaurs that everyone gets wrong, for example?
That's a really good question. I thought about this a little. It's hard for me to know what other people think about dinosaurs, but the main thing that strikes me, when I interact with the public and they're asking questions is, we kind of collectively know a lot about dinosaurs culturally, but most people don't know very much about them. They don't know necessarily what they're looking at when they see a fossil skeleton. Um, and it's kind of what even is a dinosaur?
Sure.
Dinosaurs are a specific group of extinct animals. They're not just all extinct reptiles or everything that has a skeleton. And, one of the most exciting things that people who have some level of knowledge about dinosaurs know is that birds are living dinosaurs. So there's one group of dinosaurs that survived and is with us today. And that kind of reframes how we might think about dinosaurs. So what kind of hypotheses you might have about the animal whose skeleton we can see, what it was like in life. So they're big. Many dinosaurs are big. I don't know if you know that about dinosaurs, but it's a fact. It's tempting to think of them as lumbering reptiles, but actually we know a lot more about their biology, and we have some glimpses of their ecology and how they might have been in life. And they're not really like anything alive today, but they wouldn't have been lumbering brutes of some kind. They're quite interesting dynamic animals. If you saw them on safari, this would be a pretty interesting thing to see.
But Roger, how do you know that? You say they were not lumbering and they were, but we've never seen one. So how do we know?
Yeah, so it's how do we go from having the bones of the skeleton to knowing something about the biology and potentially the behavior of the animal? Well, one of the most direct insights we get is from the internal structure of bones. So the bone grows as the animal grows, and it, accumulates material on the outside, so it's growing bigger. And, if we cut the bone and can look at the history of growth that's recorded in the bone, we know something about how fast an animal grows. And dinosaurs grow slightly slower than mammals, but a lot faster than reptiles of a similar body size. And that's telling us, that they grow fast. Growth has a relationship with physiology and metabolic rates. It's not strictly necessarily a very, very direct one, but they're much closer to being something like a bird or a mammal than they are to being a reptile. And in order to feed the relatively fast metabolisms of dinosaurs, they must have been pretty active animals.
So when I was, when I was a kid back, shortly after the dinosaurs had gone extinct, well, the non-avian dinosaurs had gone extinct, we were told that they kind of lived in swamps, particularly the big sauropods. They'd never, Brontosaurus and Diplodocus, that they probably couldn't even support their weight and what have you. But that's all been overturned with these sorts of discoveries that you're talking about now. Is that right?
Yeah, so that was an interesting idea. And actually, when I was an undergraduate student, I did a physics class where one of the problems that was set for us was supposed to prove that a giant sauropod dinosaur couldn't support its weight in air, so on land, and must have been submerged in the water. But we know that that's not true. One of our most direct pieces of evidence about how dinosaurs walked and where they walked is we get their footprints. And there's lots of evidence of sauropods walking on firm substrates in subaerial environments, not just, well, we have much less evidence of them submerging themselves in the water, in fact. And physically, sauropods, the sauropod dinosaurs, they're the quadrupedal, giant, long-necked herbivorous dinosaurs like Diplodocus. They could be really big. The biggest ones we know of are comfortably about 60 tons. And that's about 3 times bigger than the largest mammal that ever lived. It's also about 3 times bigger than the largest other dinosaur that ever lived. So when we say dinosaurs are really, really big, bigger than any land animal alive today, it's actually just sauropods that are like that. Other dinosaurs, the biggest sizes they got to about the size of the biggest mammals. And some of the earliest biomechanics work on sauropod dinosaurs by McNeill Alexander looked specifically at the question of whether vertebrate bone was strong enough to support and vertebrate muscle was strong enough to propel a land animal of about that size. And that's comfortably within the range of sizes that you can support on land, given the material properties of the vertebrates. So there doesn't seem to be any constraints from the perspective of theory on how big dinosaurs are well below the maximum potential body size of a land animal.
But the ones that survive now, the birds, are all small compared to the huge size of dinosaurs, right? So was there some advantage in the small size?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. It's useful to think just how small birds are, because there are small dinosaurs. We said the biggest dinosaurs are really, really big. The smallest dinosaurs are also really big. They weighed about half a kilo, which to us doesn't seem very big. But if you think about other groups like birds and mammals,
Yes.
the smallest birds weigh 2 grams. So the smallest non-bird dinosaurs weigh, what do you get then? I've got to do some maths really quickly. They weigh about 250 times the size of the smallest birds. So they're tremendously huge. And if you just, enumerated the sizes of all living bird species, the smallest dinosaurs are in the upper 90th percentile. So there's only 10% of living bird species that are the size of the smallest dinosaurs or bigger. But it's actually a really huge mystery how it is that birds, unlike all other dinosaurs, manage to become small. Because you've got these dinosaurs that are around for 170 million years. There's many groups and species evolving through that time. They have lots of chances to be really small, but they never do it. So it looks like there's something in the biology of dinosaurs or the environment they lived in that's stopping them from being small.
What about mammals? I mean, weren't the mammals and the proto-mammals that existed during the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous, they were quite small generally. Were they keeping the dinosaurs from getting small?
It's possible. So we don't know the answer, but it's useful to think of like some possible explanations. And actually, that's one of my favorite personal explanations, is once you realize dinosaurs are physiologically more similar to mammals than they are to other reptiles. It's like, why can lizards be small? Why can mammals be small? Why can birds be small? It's possible that mammals are just better at being small, and they're like physiologically or energetically more similar to dinosaurs. So you've got these two groups dividing like potential body sizes between them, with mammals at the time of dinosaurs being generally pretty small, and dinosaurs at the same time being generally pretty big. And this is a little like, why are insects really small today and vertebrates can't be as small as insects? Insects can't be as big as vertebrates, you know. These might be good examples of groups that are somehow excluding each other from body size categories.
I suppose there are some tiny fish that were smaller than vertebrates. I mean, you're talking about on the smaller than invertebrates. So you're really talking on land, are you?
Yeah, I'm talking about animals on land, I guess. And there's overlaps between insects and vertebrate body sizes, but the smallest insects, even if you include the smallest fish,
they're small.
Smallest insects are much smaller than the smallest vertebrates, and obviously the biggest vertebrates are much bigger than the biggest insects.
Yeah, great, Roger. Shall we break, Tim, for a short break and go to our sponsors for a second?
We can indeed, and then we'll come back and continue finding out more about the fascinating world of dinosaurs.
Sure. See you soon, folks. Hi, Tim. You're looking particularly snazzy today. What are you wearing?
I'm wearing a piece from a company called Grace and Garbo. And actually, you know a little bit more about them than I do, to be honest.
Yeah, you're right, I do. And
you're the fashion queen. Yeah.
I'm also wearing a piece from Grace and Garbo. So this is a delightful knitwear outfit set up in Birmingham. What they do is they source knitwear, quality knitwear from all around the world. So it's vintage, one-off pieces, many of which they then hand embellish, like the one you're wearing today with its beautiful purple flowers. And so they're big on sustainability. Nothing goes to waste. Everything is sort of recycled and reused. And if you want to know more about them, then have a look at the link beneath this episode.
And thank you very much to them for supporting our podcast. I hope their sales soar.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Grace and Garbo.
Well, welcome back. So, dinosaurs were around for a very long time. They're an extremely successful group of organisms. And what did it look like, the world that they inhabited compared to the world today? I mean, did Jurassic Park sort of get it right in terms of the way they moved and the way they foraged, do you think? I know it's a film, but presumably the grasslands they were feeding in didn't exist. The fruiting trees that were around in those films weren't there throughout most of the life of the dinosaurs.
Tim, are you suggesting that Hollywood's not real?
I think to answer your exact question, I have to remember exactly what happened in Jurassic Park. In Jurassic Park now, there are so many movies, and they've become further and further from what we understand scientifically, at least in that time. But there's several different things here. There's big differences in plants. It's not till near the end of the history of dinosaurs that flowering plants start to first appear and then become diverse and start to include, say, like tree-sized plants. There aren't grasslands during the time of dinosaurs, certainly. And most of the time, there's no grass at all.
Yeah.
So the low-growing vegetation is mostly ferns. There aren't fruits in the strict sense. The fruit is a structure of angiosperms only, but there are sort of analogues of fruit on some other plants. So you could get fleshy cones of some gymnosperms. But even including those, fruit is a lot less abundant in most of the time dinosaurs are around. And the same for things like nuts and other organs, reproductive organs that are intended, evolved in plants in order for animals to aid with seed dispersal. The world on average is hotter than today in the time of dinosaurs. There aren't substantial polar ice caps. There may have been ice on high mountains and things like this. Because there's no ice, short-term climate fluctuations over the timescale of thousands of and tens of thousands of years are probably less. But remember that dinosaurs are around for 170 million years. So in that time, there's a lot of climate variation, including about 100 million years ago, probably one of the, if not the hottest time in the last 250 million years or so. The continents, when dinosaurs first appear in the Triassic, are one landmass, and gradually through time they're separating. By the time dinosaurs become extinct, they're in something similar to their present day positions, but the Atlantic is smaller. And dinosaurs, most groups of dinosaurs are found most places in the world most of the time. Late in their history, as the continents fragment, you get more endemic dinosaur faunas. So it's different biogeographically today, where you get highly different groups of mammals living in different continents on Earth.
Because the tyrannosaurs, I think, were just found in the Americas and Asia, right? They didn't, is that?
Yeah, well, yeah, almost all fossils. Tyrannosaurs are interesting because they're very important as giant predators really late in the history of dinosaurs. So T-Rex, as far as we can tell, is the heaviest land predator that ever existed. And it weighed maybe 6 tons, and it's remarkable. But that group split off from other groups of predatory dinosaurs by the Middle Jurassic, so by about 160 million years ago. So Tyrannosauroids, the group that includes T-Rex, were around for about 100 million years. And our questions about their distributions are actually, it's not clear whether they ever made it into the southern continents, so places like Australia, South America, and Africa. And if not, why they didn't make it down there. But there's a few bones that might belong to them. We're not 100% sure. But many groups of dinosaurs that are that old did achieve wide distributions. There seems to be some climate controls on which groups you get where. Late in the history of dinosaurs, things like giant tyrannosauroid predators are just found in North America and Asia.
So, Roger, you've told us a lot about sort of what the world might have looked like for dinosaurs and, about the plants. And you've said a lot about, where the distribution of bones. And I guess most of our readers or listeners, sorry, will be familiar with you getting information from fossils, for example. But what other sources of information do you use to build up this picture?
Well, for the world in general, there's lots of information that comes from geology and the earth sciences. So a lot of our information on what the Earth's climate was like comes from the isotopic composition of shells of extinct fossil animals that lived, say, like in ocean water, and they're building their shells from calcium carbonate. And the ratio of what oxygen isotopes are included into the shell as they build it tells us something about temperature in the past. There's also a wide range of other similar methods. It's not so useful to list them.
Honestly, chemistry gets everywhere, Simon. I'm getting fed up with chemistry cropping up in even on dinosaur podcasts.
So there's even attempts to measure the body temperatures of dinosaurs by their chemical composition. So sometimes using this is actually pretty exciting, but it's sort of pioneering work, so we don't know exactly where it'll go. But there's some really exciting work by Yasmina Weirman, who's at Johns Hopkins now, using Raman spectroscopy to look at what bonds organic molecules have in preserved dinosaur bones. And, the proportions of different bonds might be different in endotherms to what they are in ectotherms. And there's actually quite a lot of variation in which organic bonds are left in dinosaur bones. It suggests some dinosaurs might be much more metabolically active than others. And that's pretty exciting. We didn't have glimpses of that before. But this is sort of just an emerging research area. But that's chemistry, yeah.
So when I think of dinosaurs and sort of what they ate and what they sort of fed upon, I kind of tend to think of them falling into groups. So I think certainly the large predators of being on two legs with relatively short arms, a bit like a small version of T-Rex. I think of these things like, I don't know if you still call them this, but Stegosaurus was wandering around with its head down, probably grazing on on ferns, quite armored. Your sort of giraffe equivalents being the sauropods or that type of dinosaur. Is that kind of generally right, or what? And then there's obviously some smaller ones. Well, what was the dinosaur community like?
So you're right that there's lots of groups of herbivores and they have quite different body forms. And for a long time, paleontologists have suggested that they're browsing at different heights. And that's probably correct. There's no serious reasons to doubt that. In terms of predators, T-Rex is big, has a giant head and relatively small arms. But actually, if you look at all the groups of big predators, things that could weigh a ton or more, and there's quite a few groups that did that during the long history of dinosaurs. There are actually groups that have really long arms with big, like ferocious looking claws on them. Like Megaraptor, which is a South American dinosaur, and it has a group of relatives called Megaraptorids. And that's like, it's kind of I sort of imagine these things like Freddy Krueger or something, because they have really very long arms with really pretty ferocious claws at the ends of them. So there's
Did they walk on? Did they walk on two legs, or were they walking on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So all dinosaurian predators walk on two legs.
Yeah. Okay.
And being bipedal like that, because we're mammals, and most mammals are quadrupeds, and we evolved to be bipeds from a quadrupedal ancestor. Actually, the bipedal dinosaurs, they're retaining that, they're inheriting that from their ancestors. The first dinosaur, we're very confident because early dinosaurs are all bipedal. The first dinosaur was a biped.
Huh.
It's very different to mammals. And if you see a quadrupedal dinosaur like a sauropod or a stegosaur, it evolved to be a quadruped from a bipedal ancestor. And when you ask this question about how dinosaurs moved, that actually has big impacts on how they move. Because even the quadrupedal dinosaurs, mostly the way that they become quadrupeds by putting their hands on the ground, by and large, they don't quite get it right in a pure biomechanical or functional sense. So they manage to put their hands on the ground, but most of the groups, including stegosaurs and ceratopsians like Triceratops, still have a bit of a bend in the elbow, so they never get sort of a pillar erect forelimb that's going to passively support their weight. They've always got a little bend, even when they become weighing more than 10 tons. So probably they always have to use a bit of muscular energy to hold their body mass up, their giant body mass up. And this is very different to giant quadrupedal mammals.
So one more quick question, Simon, if you don't mind, on the kind of community thing, structure of dinosaurs. One thing that I kind of, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there weren't kind of were there arboreal, so tree living dinosaurs, much like we have, right? There are a number of mammals, for example, that live in trees, whether they're primates or whether they're anteaters, tree climbing anteaters. Was there anything like that in the dinosaur world?
It's a really good question. So what we can say for sure is there are no dinosaurs outside of birds that have really clear slam dunk indicators of being arboreal.
Huh.
They don't seem to specialize the skeleton for arboreality in the way that you'd see in a squirrel or like a perching bird. So it's really hard for us to tell, but we can say they're missing like the adaptations of highly arboreal things today, by and large. Some of the really close relatives of birds, though, have big gliding surfaces, either made of feathers, or do you know there's a group of dinosaurs that have a bat-like wing membrane?
Oh, I didn't.
Yeah.
And not pterosaurs.
Not pterosaurs.
Actually,
The
dinosaurs.
outside of the dinosaurs.
Yeah.
They're called Scansoriopterigids. And some years ago, I had to practice saying that over and over again. There's a Scansoriopterigid called Epidexipteryx, for example. It's a bit of a tongue twister. But there was an amazing fossil.
Can you just explain that? Sorry. Can you just explain that for our listeners, what you mean by that? Because they won't know the...
Yeah. So one of these is the name of a group of dinosaurs. They're called Scansoriopterigids, and they're named after a member of the group called Scansoriopteryx. And then when I say the Scansoriopteryx, the Scansoriopterygid Epidexipteryx. Epidexipteryx is just another genus of Scansoriopterygid. So they have some of the longest, most convoluted names of dinosaurs, but they include one species that has one of the shortest names of all animals, which its genus name has two letters and its species name has two letters. It's just called Ichi, which is Yiqi. This is a Chinese dinosaur. Ichi is one of the most phenomenal discoveries, in my view, of the last 20 years, because it preserves what looks like a kind of bat-like wing membrane. And it's a dinosaur that's quite closely related to birds. And it's telling us that among the extinct dinosaurian relatives of birds, there are things that are experimenting with different forms of gliding or flight. So you don't just hit on sort of one way of flying early in the history of dinosaurs. Early in the history of bird-related dinosaurs. You're kind of evolving a bunch of different ways, and then in the end, the only surviving ones are birds that have quite a specific flight apparatus that's unique to birds.
Why did they take to the skies?
I mean, how do you think about this as an evolutionary biologist? I tend to think that groups with many species and evolving lineages will basically do anything that there's an opportunity for them to do.
So chasing resources or escaping predators would be the two things that I would suggest is how these adaptations got started.
Yeah. Yeah, if you think about it on what was the selective pressure that drove that specific evolving lineage? If you think about it, like there's lots of evolving lineages experiencing many selective pressures, exploring all the possible ways that you can be a dinosaur. We know that's one of them because that's something that happened. Um, it's happening in largely predatory dinosaurs. It's plausible that they're chasing prey, but this is really hard to tell.
Mm.
But it's relevant to the question about arboreality because it seems very likely at this point, not everyone agrees about it, but it seems very likely that bird flight evolved from the trees downwards in animals that must then sort of be initially arboreal.
Yeah.
But it's not actually clear. They're predators, so maybe they're chasing prey, but we can't be 100% sure. And it's difficult when you go back in time to know what caused specific traits to evolve. We can observe that the traits evolved. And we can have hypotheses about why they evolved, but then testing those hypotheses is the real challenge. So if anyone has any ideas, they should try them out.
Great. So, Roger, I'm sure many of our listeners are sort of, will have children or will indeed be children who are obsessed with dinosaurs and, sort of dream of making a career out of this. Would you have any advice to give to them?
Yeah. So study hard, care about science. If you're not really interested in science, then, well, this is the thing. Dinosaurs have such a broad appeal, and there are many ways of working in paleontology, of which, one path is to be engaged in the science of paleontology. There's obviously many other roles that you might describe as sort of dinosaur adjacent. But, be passionate about what you do. This is a simple thing. If you want to be a scientific paleontologist, then care actually about all the sciences you study. Paleontologists, we might have a sort of bad reputation for just dreaming big or speculating or guessing what dinosaurs were like. You could call that hypothesis generation, but as scientists, it's important that we're testing those hypotheses using evidence. So we're replacing opinion and argument and subjectivity with objectivity and sort of tests of ideas. And that can bring us a long way.
And it's obviously exciting. People love dinosaurs, but is there any relevance for the world today?
I think it's useful to imagine what if we didn't know anything about dinosaurs or other extinct animals from the past. In the case of dinosaurs, one of the really startling things about them is I don't think anyone would guess that, there's a group of animals related to birds that was around, until 70 million years ago, members of which could weigh 60 tons. I don't think you'd guess at sauropods or T-Rex. I don't think biologists would have predicted the existence of these animals. And I think that has a huge effect on how we just think about organisms and ourselves and the history of the planet that we live on. That's the most.
So the fact these giants went extinct and a whole group of incredibly successful animals, obviously birds survive, but non-avian dinosaurs, the fact they all went extinct, that kind of tells us about how fragile existence can be for a group of species.
Yeah, so more broadly, that the Earth has changed a lot in the past, and it likely will continue to change in the future. It's useful to bear in mind the timescale of those changes. So dinosaurs were around for 170 million years. Even in that time, the Earth is changing a lot, and individual groups of dinosaurs are becoming extinct and new groups are evolving, things like this. Specifically for the extinction of dinosaurs 66 million years ago, you can think of that as the worst day to be alive of the last 500 million years. that probably has no, we might be really unlucky, but that's very unlikely to happen, in our lifespans, or maybe even the lifetime of our species. Um, so that's not a direct analog for the present day.
It might have been a good day for some mammals, though. You know,
It was a good day for some. I don't think it was a good day for anyone, but it might have been a like few thousand years for some groups of organisms. 100 million years ago was the hottest time of the last 250 million years, the Cenomanian-Turonian thermal maximum. And, that's firmly in the time that dinosaurs are important on Earth. And there's groups of dinosaurs that disappear that have been around for a long time before that. So like groups of large predators, for example, that were around for 50 million years or more before that disappear and we never see them again. So that's a time when Earth's climate and the sea level and many other related aspects are changing a lot. And we can see it has clear effects on organisms. And in the broader fossil record, there's lots of examples of that. So that possibly has a message that's relevant to today.
So, Simon, I think we're running out of time. Have you got one final quick question for Roger?
Yeah, so this is not really a scientific question, but one I'm just curious about. So, say Jurassic Park was real and you could bring back a single dinosaur, which one would you choose?
I have three answers. One is my personal answer, is I'd bring back Triceratops because I just think it's neat. One of them is I think if you put it to a popular vote, you'd end up with T-Rex. And I would defer to the popular vote because let's face it, probably objectively, we thought objectivity is important. T-Rex is objectively one of the most terrific animals that ever lived. But scientifically, I'd really want to bring back something very closely related to birds, possibly the Scansoriopterygidae epidextrix.
Just because no one else on the planet can say it.
It would just be astonishing to know how these animals worked and really what they were doing. The goal of bringing this thing back to life is to see what it really does. And, that's going to tell you not just about sort of a fascinating individual animal, but something that's important for the origin of birds. And, birds are so important today and they hugely different to anything else. So understanding their origins seems really important.
Wow. Well, I mean, what a fascinating group of animals. And, nice to get some insights into what their world was like from Roger and the unpronounceable dinosaur that, he would like to bring back. I mean, it's pretty amazing what they've been able to find out about dinosaurs, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess you're closer to the area than I am because you also look at.
I'm a dinosaur. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, I was hinting at it. I didn't want to come out and say it. No, I mean, big things compared to my little molecules that I look at. I think I wasn't aware of the diversity within dinosaurs.
Okay.
Because typically we see what we see in museums. We see, there's fossils and there's skeletons. And beyond that, when it comes to dinosaurs, I'm a layperson. So beyond that, I didn't realize there was this huge breadth. And so for me, that was really, truly mind-blowing, to be honest.
No, and I mean, and one thing we didn't really have time to talk about, which would have been an opportunity to get another dinosaur expert on a later date, is, we didn't talk about the fact that some of these finds aren't of whole dinosaur bodies, but they're of individual bones or even fragments of bones. And we didn't really touch on some of the chemical methods. That was probably my fault. I probably put him off by teasing you by saying chemistry gets in everywhere.
No, well, not at all. We can't get to everything in a single episode. And I think it's interesting to know. Yeah, like you said, we have these samples that can be disparate, can be from different eras, from different parts, different animals, and then sort of like being a detective, putting all the pieces together, and then joking aside, it does come down to chemistry at the end of the day. What is the commonality between all these things? There's only so many elements.
No, but the fact you can look at those elements in fossils, and you can look at ratios of, say, isotopes of I think you said oxygen, so that's oxygen with different numbers of neutrons in the in the nucleus of the atoms, and you can actually make inferences about what the temperature was like, about even what the potentially whether how warm-blooded or cold-blooded they were.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, you can get information he was saying about from bonds, right? About metabolic
Yeah,
activity from chemical bonds, right? So, you know, we know that certain types of bonds will be more easily digested than others, for example. So we can use this kind of information. And of course, there's also carbon dating. So the different isotopes of carbon can tell us about you know, about how old things are, just as he's again using the ratios of isotopes. And so, yeah, it's fascinating to me that something as huge as the Tyrannosaurus Rex, when we're trying to study it, it still comes down to the individual atoms. It
no,
warms my heart.
yeah, no, it is fascinating. Well, I really enjoyed that, and I suspect we'll get plenty of questions from
Yeah.
our listeners and watchers if you're watching on YouTube. So yeah, please send them in, um, and I'll see you next week then, Syma. I have to say I'm looking forward to producing a an advertising short for this episode. I think a dinosaur short will be fun.
Will we know which is the dinosaur and which is you, though, Tim? Was
Yeah,
that
and we didn't get on to whether they are cold-blooded like you or warm-blooded like me, did we? Okay.
excellent? I'll get you back next week.
See you later, Simon.